بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to our next lesson on the famous text on Aqidah, Tahawiyyah. And in this video, I want to look at the next section of the book with our commentary. So, قديم بلا ابتداء. This is talking about qidam and baqa. قديم means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is eternal, qadim, and bila ibtida'in. So that's also reinforcing the idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have a beginning. In the footnote, there is some commentary here. Al-qidam thalathatu anwa'in. So there's three types of way of understanding qadim or qidam, the word eternality. One is al-qidam az-zamani. So one is in reference to time. So for example, yesterday has passed in relation to today. So yesterday was, for example, today is Thursday, yesterday was Wednesday. So that's one way of understanding or conceptualizing qidam, which is the most natural one that comes to our mind. One is called qidam izafi, which is in relation to something, izafa. So for example, the father in relation to the son, right? So the father in relation to the son, because the father came before the son. So that's not necessarily to do with time, but in terms of relationships. Okay, so that's a second way of understanding qadim or qidam. Wathalith, al-qidam al-zati, and I'll just read the Arabic here. Al-qidam al-zati huwa ma lam yasbiq bi'admin wa huwa al-murad fi haqqi ta'ala. So this is the one which is eternity in essence, right? Eternality in essence. And that is, and this is really important, ma lam yasbiq, like there was no non-existence before it, right? And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is really, really important because we think conceptually often out of habit in terms of time. So what was there before Allah, right? That's a question that's often asked. If God is eternal, what was there before him? Because we're so used to thinking in terms of time that there was nothing and then there was something. But what the author is saying in the footnote here is that you need to reconceptualize, reconfigure the way you think about eternality. And eternality means in essence, not in relation to anything, not in relation to time, right? And so there was no period where there was nothing, okay? And bal huwa wahda, that only Allah muttasif, only Allah has this attribute. بِذَلِكَ النَّوْء مِنَ الْقِدَمِ. Only Allah has this. Me and you, for example, we would fall within the first and second time, right? In terms of we came into existence out of non-existence. There was a time when Haroon did not exist, right? But now he exists. Or Haroon's father, my father's name is Ibrahim, for example. Ibrahim in relation to Haroon came first. But when it comes to Allah, it doesn't apply to Allah in the same way. And this is really, really important as a footnote to bear in mind. That's the reason I highlighted it here, because I really wanted to bring that point out. Okay, so I hope that's very, very clear. It's very, very useful. This is why terminology, understanding what we mean by words, is very, very important. Then the author continues, لأنه تعالى لو كان حادثا. So this word hadith is important as well. Muhdath or hadith. That if Allah, the Exalted, had been originated, he would have needed an originator. Right? And the word he used, iftaqara, which actually, if you remember in English or in Urdu, faqir, in need. So if Allah was created or he was originated, hadith, then he would have needed a muhdith, right? Someone who brought him into existence. Okay? And then that would have required somebody else to bring him into existence. You would have needed an originator for the originator, okay? And this would lead, وَهَلُمَّ جَرَى إِلَى, this would lead to what's called tasalsul. Tasalsul, we use the word in tasawwuf, for example, silsila, right? You trace your lineage back to your sheikh. Here, it means in a specific sense, tasalsul here, yatasalsal means infinite regress, right? Like you're going backwards forever. Who created originator? Who created that originator? Who created that originator? Ila akhir. You keep going, you keep going, you keep going. Aw yanti ila qadimin, or you would go back to qadim, an eternal being. So you have two options if you think about it logically. But he says you have to cancel tasalsul out, mahal, and because it rationally doesn't make sense, logically doesn't make sense. فَتَعَيَّنَ الْإِنْتِهَاء إِلَىٰ قَدِيمٍ. So we come to this idea that through elimination, through reflection, tafakkur, that infinite regress is rationally impossible. Mahal. There must be an eternal being. So this is really, really important, this particular discussion here, because people struggle with this, because we're creatures of habit, and we are accustomed naturally to think of everything as having a beginning. There was a point when it came into existence. You and I came into existence. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as being the originator, is different. Okay. And then he continues, وَإِنَّمَا أَكَّلَ بِقَوْلِهِ. So why did he say قَدِيمٌ بِلَا إِبْتِدَاءٍ? He could have said, Imam Tahawiyyah could have said, قَدِيمٌ, he is eternal. Why did he say بِلَا إِبْتِدَاءٍ? And why did he emphasize it? What was the need to emphasize this? So he says, لأن القديم في اللغة مأخوذ من قوله قدم الشيء بالضم قدما فهو قديم أي مضى عليه زمان طويل. So this is because, linguistically speaking, it is derived from a statement that people usually say. This statement, قدم الشيء بالضم قدما فهو قديم. A long time has passed by it. And you can see immediately what the problem might be here, right? أي مضى زمان طويل, like a long time has passed, right? And he brings in Imam Zamakhshari, who died in 538 Hijri. He had a book among his many works on the Quran, a tafsir of the Quran. In fact, I was reading just a few days ago a book by an important Hanafi Usuli, Imam Bazdawi. There's many Bazdawi, but there's one called Imam Fakhruddin al-Bazdawi. And one of the authors mentions in the introduction that anyone that reads that book, Al-Usul, by Imam Bazdawi, and this book by Imam Zamakhshari, they've learned knowledge. You can see that Imam Zamakhshari has a very high rank in the Islamic intellectual tradition. So he brings in Imam Zamakhshari here, who's an authority on the Quran. He does have, there's kalam on him in terms of his theological inclinations, but that need not interest us at this moment in time. Okay. في قوله تعالى حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم. This is in Surah Yasin, verse number 39. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the moon returns like an old shriveled palm leaf. Right, so you can see, like Imam Tahawi has used this word, but we need to be careful how we understand it. So he's going into some discussion here, the author. So this is important. Huwa al-hawl, because what does this word hawl mean? That something qadim is that over which a year has passed, because the least duration for something to be described as old is a year. Right, so here is what he's saying. Right, وَهَذَا شَيْخٌ قَدِيم. So for example, we say وَهَذَا شَيْخٌ قَدِيم, that this is like something really, really old. This is an old building. بِنَاءٌ قَدِيمٌ. Some people say that as well, right? So we say this is an old building, or this is an old sheikh. وَهَذَا شَيْخٌ قَدِيم. Okay. So people customarily say bina qadim, this is an old building, or this is a sheikh qadim. What is the meaning for this? وَهَذَا الْمَانَى غَيْرُ مُرَادٍ. But we don't mean this by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't mean that, for example, when we use it in our everyday usage, that it comes and goes or it passes. Okay. So this is something to bear in mind as well with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's meant by qadim, and here what he says, في صفاته هو الذي لا ابتداء لوجوده, that there is no ibtida, there is no beginning to his wujud, his existence. Okay. So therefore, فأكد بذلك احترازا عن المعنى اللغوي والعرفي. So the reason he kind of uses word qadim alongside bila ibtida'in is to make it clear that we should not be perplexed by its linguistic meaning, the one that's here in the Quran, for example, referring to the moon, right, which comes and goes. Nor should we be imprisoned, if you like, by its customary meaning. So, when we talk about qadim, like I said here in a footnote, we usually think of it in terms of time or in relation to something. There's also a footnote here, Imam Zamakhshari, which I haven't read in Arabic, but it's all there for someone if they intend to read it, inshallah. Okay, let's move on. So the next one, da'imun bila intihain. Da'imun bila intihain. Da'im, and let's have a look at the footnote. Da'im al-baqi bila intihain. Laysa malhuqun bil adam. So when we say bila intihain, without an end, it doesn't mean that there's going to be an end to it. Okay, we'll go into details maybe later on about that, but let's just see what the Shari has to say. Da'imun, da'im, dawam, eternality or everlasting, bila intiha'in, without an end. So we talked about qadim, now we talk about da'im. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we've already affirmed, struggling a little bit here, apologize, that he is qadim. So if we have affirmed that he is qadim, it follows that he is also everlasting. He makes a point here. Is al-qidam yunafi al-adam, because qidam, being qadim, eternal, negates the idea of non-existence. Qadimun bila intiha'in, right? He is pre-eternal and he will have no end. So innama qal da'imun bila intiha'in, and sometimes he only said this, da'imun bila intiha'in, because that we know anna dawamahu laysa bimuta'allaq az-zaman li-intihai. Again, so we talked about this in the footnote before, that the reason da'imun bila intihai is made clear here is that this is not to do with time, right? Because time comes to an end. Time will eventually cease. Time is a creation, if you like. How can Allah, who created time, who is the creator of everything, be bound by his creation? That's preposterous. That doesn't make sense. So once we understand who Allah is, a lot of these objections in our mind immediately disappear, right? And this, maybe inshallah, in a separate lesson, I'll talk about what one of my favorite authors, Shah Walullah Dihlawi, has to say about Qadr, like a separate lesson. It's a very unique take on Qadr, about this idea of divine predestination. Anyway, Allah says in the Quran, for example, Huwa al-awwalu wal-akhir. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the first and the last, right? This is in Surah Al-Hadid, verse number 3. Ay awwal bizatihi. So this is like a really important word to remember, that. We're talking about Allah's essence here. We're not talking about him in terms of time or in relation to anything, because Allah's not like anything. He's not bound by anything, because time is a sort of attachment. Time is a form of imprisonment. Time is a form of being caught up in something. And in relation to something, means there's a relationship. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have a relationship in any way with anything. وَالْآخِرُ بِذَاتِ غَيْرُ مُتَعَلِّقٍ بِالزَّمَانٍ. So this is something to bear in mind. هُوَ الْأَوَّلُ وَالْآخِرُ, that he is the first and the last. Namely intrinsically, the first and intrinsically last, not bound by time. Okay. And he says that he described himself like this. So it becomes clear. وَإِنَّمَا نَفْسُ بِهَذَا لِأَلَّا يُفْهَمْ مِنْ أَوْلِيَتِهِ وَآخِرِيَتِهِ مَا يُفْهَمْ مِنْ أَوْلِيَتِهِ وَآخِرِ غَيْرِهِ. That it becomes distilled from anything else that has a beginning and an end. Okay. Because everything else has a beginning and an end in terms of time, but not intrinsically. So Allah is free from being related to time, which is a point that we've really labored. Nothing else has a beginning and in of itself, which only belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Next one, wala yafna wala yabid. Wala yafna wala yabid. You might have heard the word fani or fana in Sufi literature, right? We're not going to get into it, but you can see that a lot of language that's used in other sciences is used in languages like fiqh and aqidah as well, but they have their distinctive meaning, okay? So I always tell my students that when you use words, you should also be aware of which genre, which author is using that word, so you're aware of where to situate it, okay? So la yafna wala yabid. He does not perish, fana, and nor does he cease to exist, okay? Doesn't cease to exist. He does not come to nothingness and perish, doesn't turn into atoms, na'udhu billahi min dhalik, or dust, nothing like this. That happens to me and you because we're material creation, right? Again, وَإِنَّمَا جَمَعَ بَيْنَ اللَّفْظَيْنِ. He used both words here, yafni and yabid, to emphasize تَأْكِيدًا لِدَوَامِهِ وَبَقَائِهِ. So we mentioned above, right? Dawam and baqa. This phrase here is an emphasis of the two phrases we've just covered. Okay, it has been said, waqila, he intended by the first expression, yani yafna, to negate his essence coming to nothing. So Allah's zat will never come to nothing. And by the second expression, yabid, to negate nullification of his life and attributes. So nor does Allah himself cease to exist, nor will any of his attributes cease to exist. This is an important discussion that we will cover maybe in an advanced lesson about God's attributes. Does God have that attribute even if he never used it, right? Is the attribute eternal? And we'll come to that in some advanced lesson, inshallah. I'm signposting it here because it's an important conversation that students of advanced knowledge in Aqidah and Usul will need to be aware of, and the choice you make has implications, but we won't go into that today, inshallah. I'm signposting it, okay? So in respect of his essence attribute, is impossible due to his intrinsically established eternality, right? Because bizati, Allah is eternal in his essence, okay? He is wajib al-wujud. It's a very important phrase. Wajib al-wujud. He is the necessary existence, okay, in his essence. The word zat is very important, right? And whatever is intrinsic can never come to an end. وَمَا بِالذَّاتِ لَا يَزُولُ, right? وَمَا بِالذَّاتِ لَا يَزُولُ. Whatever is intrinsic can never come to non-existence. In one of the translations, there's a footnote here, which I'll just read, not in this book, but in the translation. Let's see if you can make sense of it. In other words, whatever admits non-existence cannot be eternal, because the existence of anything that may admit non-existence is merely possible. Anything whose existence is merely possible must be originated. Now, every originated being needs a being to bring it into existence. In other words, to give it preponderance to its existence over its non-existence. And it is established that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is eternal by the aforementioned proof. And any being whose eternality is proven, its non-existence impossible. And then he talks about the proof of Allah's attribute of perpetuity is therefore the same as that of his eternality. So that's just some discussion there about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next one, وَلَا يَبِيد, which we haven't gone, لَا يَنْقَطِعُ بَقَاؤُهُ يَقُولُ بِذَاتِ الْقَبِذَةِ قَدْ انْتَهَى. Okay, that's fine. We'll move on, inshallah. Some notes. Okay. Al-irada. So we're moving on to the next section. Irada. Irada means, for one of a better phrase, will. Not niyyah, intention. Irada. Okay. Al-irada. ولا يكون إلا ما يريد. ولا يكون إلا ما يريد. So let's have a look. ولا يكون, nothing happens except what he wills. ولا يكون, كان يكون, nothing happens إلا ما يريد. أراد يريد إرادة. Nothing happens except what Allah wills to happen. Okay, he wills to happen. لأن كل موجود سواه فهو بتخليقه وتكوينه وإرادته. Because everything besides him only exists through Allah producing, creating, and willing it. Right? As everything besides him is possible. لكونه ما سواه ممكنا. إمكان. Everything besides Allah is possible. And that which is possible, i.e., and everything beside it is possible in its existence, are one of the two sides, either something coming to existence or not into existence, right? There has to be a cause that brings it into it. So you have an option: something comes into existence or doesn't come into existence, right? Well, ممكن لا يتجرى بحال تعريف إلا so that you need something which is a cause, right? Like, for example, a simple example is you can have a bottle of water like I have one in front of me. You can have a bottle like you have in front of me, either with water or no water in it. But to decide whether there's going to be water in that bottle or not, you need something to cause either of those two options to happen, right? And so that cause must be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's irada, his will, okay? So it's very simple if you think about it, that something that's possible conceptually or physically, it can either come into existence or not into existence, right? But either way, it needs a murjih. It needs something that can make it happen, to make a decision either way. And that can only be the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is ma la murid sifa, because there's no one who has the irada, this cause, preponderating cause they call it, besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. And then in the footnote, there's some discussion which we can look at maybe later on, inshallah. But it's an important one, but maybe we'll come back to it in a second. And then he brings in a verse from the Quran here. يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ. Allah does whatever he wishes. Verse number 40. يَحْكُمْ مَا يُرِيدُ. That's in Surah Al Imran. يَحْكُمْ مَا يُرِيدُ in Surah Ma'idah. That's not verse number 1. I think the reference in there is slightly off there. Okay. Surah Al-Ma'idah, anyway, يحكم ما يريد. Okay. And then he brings another verse, إنما قولنا لشيء إذا أردناه أن نقول له كن فيكون. This is the most important one, the most famous one. Our word to a thing when we intend it. أردناه. Can you see it's taken from the Quran? إرادة. أن نقول له كن فيكون. That we only say to it be, and it is. This is in the Quran as well. Okay. Al-irada, in the footnote here, just going back to the footnote, is a sifat, is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from his attributes. Okay. Okay. And then he goes into some discussion. Okay. Wasifat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes himself with two words here. Bil mashiyya wal irada. Mashiyya is volition and irada is will. Okay. So you have this in the Quran as well. Yaf'alu ma yasha. That's the mashiyya here. Irada is here, and you have irada in the last two verses. So we have to affirm that he literally possesses them. Okay. And then he talks about certain sects that deny it. So kama za'am al-Ka'bi, as Ka'bi has said, Ka'bi al-Balkhi, he was one of the scholars of the Mu'tazilite group. and he was the head of one of their subgroups. So they splintered into groups, the Ka'biyyah. Okay. For example, one of his positions that Allah does not possess will and that all his acts in void emanate from him. So that's something that's completely opposite to what we've been discussing. And he also says, and those are the Mu'tazilites who followed him, like Al-Nazam. And again, Nazam is, he was also a Mu'tazilite, obviously, and from Basra. And the Nazamiyyah is named after him. Okay. And he again described, he disagreed with his colleagues on certain things, which are noted as well. Okay. So what do they say? They say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have the attribute of will. This is like a scholarly discussion, but we'll just entertain it for now. Okay. لا يصف بالإرادة حقيقة بل مجاز. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only has this in a figurative sense. It doesn't really have will. It's just a figurative description, right? And this is why they say, this is the li'anna here in Arabic means the reason why. Here shahwa, because they say shahwa means desire. And say Allah cannot have desire, right? To have will is to have desire. It presupposes that you have desire. And we can't say that Allah has desire, so therefore he doesn't have will. That's their logic, if you like. Now you can see very clearly that they're thinking of Allah in sort of anthropomorphic terms, because we have desire, God must have desire. Anyway, we respond to this. So this the claim of this, and again we're saying, look, what is the meaning of irada, right? So we say that will, according to us, is the attribute which necessitates the particularization of an object in one way rather than another, and at one time rather than another. We're not talking about shahwa here. We're talking about irada, what we talked about before, in a certain way, right? Preponderance. Had it not been for his attribute of will, all possible beings would have emerged at the same time and in a single form. Everything would have come out at the same time, everything would have come out the same. Since these objects emerge successively, things have come out over time, and we've observed this, we know this, one after the other, systematically and in various forms. We see this with our own eyes, and with distinctive attributes in accordance with his infinite wisdom dictate. It is a proof that their agent is characterized by will, as they did not intrinsically necessitate the occurrence of such multiplicity. Hence, it is known that it was due to their agent's volition, right? So this is something that they say as well. Okay. As for their assertion that will is desire, al-irada to shahwa, right? This is one of the things that they said. He basically says this is talbis, this is a trick from them, because they want to negate the attribute to Allah, right? Then he further says, desire is a specific kind of will, namely willing something in which there is benefit for the one willing it. So when we talk about shahwa, it has a specific meaning, okay? But because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is utterly self-sufficient, right? Wallahu ghaniyyun mutlaq. Yeah. He doesn't need, he doesn't have a need for anything, okay? His will is not from desire, but rather by virtue of his divinity, just because he's Allah, rububiyyah. There is no presupposition that God wills something because he desired it. It's just because he's Allah, okay? And then he goes into some linguistic discussion. وَالْإِرَادَ مُشْتَقٌ فِي اللُّغَةِ مِنَ الرَّوْدِ. The word comes from the word raud, which means talab, okay? And then he says, وَلِهَذَا سَمُّ طَالِبُ الْكَلَى رَائِدًا. That a person who looks for herbs is called a ra'id, right? And from it is saying, a ra'id la yakdhibu ahluhu, that a ra'id does not lie to his people. Well, so this is just some linguistic discussion here, but he's making the point clearly that we don't ascribe this desire to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because then you're going down the road that Allah does something because in some way there's some sort of human element to him, that he has these desires. Bal rububiyyah, because he's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's the safest position to take there. Inshallah, we'll stop there, and we'll continue in the next video, talking about mukhalafatuhu ta'ala al-hawadis, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is dissimilar to his creation. Inshallah, until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.